Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the public hearing to present the draft action plan for the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds. My name is Trent Williams. I'm a program manager with the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs. Director Boswell could not be with us today, but he sends his regards. And we would definitely like to thank the City of Prichard for allowing us to host this event here today. We're very appreciative of that. We're here today to share an overview of what's included in this draft action plan and to give you a timeline of the process. Congress and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development allocated just over $500 million to the state of Alabama to address unmet needs resulting from the hurricanes Sally and Zeta that happened in September and October of 2020. ADECA has been tasked with the administration of these funds. This is a team effort. We have partnered with Horn to help assist us with this long-term recovery project. They have extensive experience with disaster recovery, and you will hear from them in a few minutes. We know that we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of these storms, but there's a process that is required by HUD, and this meeting is an important step in that process. About a month ago, we held a listening session in Mobile to garner feedback from various stakeholders, and now this next step is the public hearing that we're having today. Again, this will outline the plan, the draft action plan for the disaster recovery money. Following this presentation, you will have the opportunity to provide comments to the proposed plan. You received a card when you came in. Filling out that card is the best way to give us your feedback. So please fill it out. You will have an opportunity to speak after the presentation. So even if you speak, please also fill out the card and turn it in as you leave. If you would like to respond after the meeting, you can send an email to disasterrecovery@adeca.alabama.gov. Again, that's disasterrecovery@adeca.alabama.gov. The draft version of the action plan will be posted on the ADECA website next Tuesday, September 20th. The public comment period will last for 30 days after publication and will end at the close of business on Thursday, October 20th. We thank you for your attendance and your interest in this matter. I'll now turn it over to Sean and Jenna from Horn to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Trent. Can y'all hear me? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you all for being here, and thanks again to the City of Prichard, Mayor Gardner, for having us here with you today. Like Trent queued up, we are here to go over our draft action plan for disaster recovery. As we go through these slides, please keep in mind that this is a draft. Everything in here is still in draft form, and the purpose of this meeting is really to kind of give you that sneak peek, a preview, and gather feedback. We will publish the draft action plan in its entirety, like Trent mentioned, next Tuesday, September 20th, so that you have time to read it, cover to cover. You will have 30 days until October 20th to submit comments on that draft action plan. So this presentation is intended to give you all a brief overview of our draft action plan. Please remember, mark your calendars. There will be a big plan published for your detailed review and comment next Tuesday. So with that, the funding for this action plan is coming from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, through a Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Grant, CDBG-DR. This grant is intended to address unmet needs for both Hurricanes Sally and Zeta. So HUD did not distinguish when they allocated funding to the state of Alabama between Sally versus Zeta. They put them all together as 2020 disasters and provided 2 separate allocations to the state. So the first allocation was published in the Federal Register in February of this year. That allocation was just a little over $311 million. Then in May, HUD published a subsequent allocation, just over $189 million. Same thing for recovery from Hurricane Sally and Zeta. Grand total, just over $501 million dedicated to meet those unmet disaster recovery needs. With those allocations, those come out in a Federal Register notice. The Federal Register notice outlines the playbook, the rules that ADECA and the state of Alabama have to follow to expend these funds. So one of the first steps is development of the action plan, which is what we're talking about here today. Everything that's developed in this plan is based on and in accordance with those rules set forth in the 2 Federal Register notices that gave state of Alabama those allocations. So some of the key drivers of our action plan are listed up here on this slide. So of course, housing recovery and housing assistance, particularly assistance for low and moderate income households, is a key priority for these funds. HUD is also very interested to see that grantees use this funding to promote social equity, to increase resilience, build back a little better, a little stronger, so that if South Alabama gets hit by another hurricane, we're better prepared. The funding can be used for housing, infrastructure improvements, and economic revitalization. One of the key components throughout, from beginning to end, from start of the grant all the way to close out, will be compliance with those HUD regulations, those federal requirements. So one of the requirements that is outlined in the Federal Register notice is that the state of Alabama conduct an unmet needs assessment to figure out where the unmet needs remain. Remember, these funds are meant to address unmet needs caused by those 2 storms. So HUD requires that the state review needs and in 3 primary sectors. So the 3 primary sectors reviewed were housing, infrastructure, and economic development. I won't talk you through all of the math on this slide, but in general, the way that the unmet needs analysis is conducted is step 1, what you see in row A, is we estimate the storm impacts. So how much damage was done. Then in line B, we bump that up. Remember I said promoting resilience and building back a little better is one of the key drivers of this plan. So we added 15% to those impacts for the cost of increased resiliency. Line C, we deducted any assistance that was already available to the state of Alabama through sources like FEMA, the SBA, or private insurance. And that gave us our total unmet needs, which you can see in row E, just under $700 million. You will note that the bulk of the unmet needs analyzed were in the housing sector. Housing accounted for over 92% of the remaining unmet need, followed by the economy at 6% and infrastructure at 2%. So this methodology, this framework is dictated by HUD and relies on data sources from federal partners like FEMA, the SBA, insurance, et cetera, to drive this. When we looked at the unmet needs by county, so the whole state was not impacted. Of course, Southern Alabama was impacted by these 2 storms. So the state further analyzed who was impacted and how. And as you can see in this breakout, between Mobile County and Baldwin County, over 91% of the remaining unmet needs lives there. We separated the city of Mobile out of Mobile County because the city of Mobile accounted for about 65% of the impact within the entire county. So you can see here, 21% of the overall unmet needs is attributable to Mobile County, not including the city of Mobile. 40% of the remaining unmet needs is attributable to the city of Mobile, and 30% attributable to Baldwin County, followed by Clarke, Escambia, and the other impacted counties. HUD requires that grantees align their program budgets, where they're going to spend the funding, with where the remaining unmet needs live. And they allow a little wiggle room. It doesn't have to be a one-for-one match, but you can see here, in general, the way that this funding is dedicated by program sector loosely aligns with the unmet needs analysis. So housing has the bulk of the program's budget at 80% program funding dedicated to housing, followed by infrastructure at 15% of the overall funding, and 5% for economic development. Part of the reason why the infrastructure budget allocation is a little bit higher than what we saw in the unmet needs assessment for infrastructure is thanks to feedback from you all. We heard a lot of feedback at the listening sessions and at some of the meetings that we've had with public stakeholders about the importance of infrastructure recovery and infrastructure improvements around the area. So 15% is dedicated to infrastructure. There are also, within the program budget, some targets, some goals, some required expenditure thresholds set by HUD. So within the programs, 80% of the entire grant, that entire $501 million, must be spent in HUD-identified most impacted and distressed areas, or MID areas. You'll see MID on some of the other slides. 70% of the funding must be spent to benefit low to moderate income households, so those households making at or below 80% of area median income. And then 15% is dedicated to support mitigation efforts, and those mitigation efforts may be standalone mitigation initiatives, perhaps hardening stormwater drainage infrastructure, or mitigation efforts in conjunction with, partnered with, an unmet need. So, for an example, elevating a home that was damaged by one of the storms. Within the program's budgets, we've got a couple different programs, couple different avenues for how this money will be administered. Remember, this is all in draft, but the housing program's budget, we've got 3 avenues for expenditure there. The largest is a $280 million single-family housing repair and recovery program. That program we'll talk about a little bit more later, but will provide funding to impacted homeowners in all impacted counties to repair storm-damaged single-family residences. So that might be an owner-occupied unit or a renter-occupied unit, and all impacted counties will be served. Then we have direct allocations, formula allocations going straight to the County of Mobile, the City of Mobile, and Baldwin County in the amount of $50 million. And $30 million for a housing competition, so a competitive grant available to any other local government partner who wishes to participate. In the infrastructure and economic development sector, we've just got 2 buckets. So the first is a direct allocation again to Mobile County, Baldwin County, and City of Mobile, just over $68 million. And then a competitive grant fund available to other interested local government partners, just over $22 million. And we'll talk a little more in depth about what these programs are and how they work in just a few slides. The overall reporting structure at a high level is shown on this slide. Of course, ADECA is the grantee. They are the CDBG-DR grantee and ultimately responsible for every penny spent out of this CDBG-DR allocation. So they're at the top, accountable for everything. ADECA will directly administer the Home Recovery Alabama program, which is that single-family home repair and replacement program I touched on. There is also a $12 million budget that will be available and accessible by local government partners to plan. Plan for what they want to spend funding on, make things like resilience plans, things of that nature, and then of course the direct allocation to Mobile, City and County, and Baldwin County, and then through a competitive method of distribution, $50 million available to other local government partners. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the programs that we've touched on, starting with that single-family housing repair and replacement program. So that program is currently dubbed the Home Recovery Alabama Program. The intent of the program is to provide grant funding to repair unmet storm-caused damages, or unrepaired, storm-caused damages to single-family residences throughout all impacted counties. So this program will be administered directly by ADECA, but it will benefit citizens and constituents in all impacted counties. The budget here is $280 million. We expect around 95% of that funding will be spent in the HUD's most impacted and distressed counties, which include Baldwin, Mobile, Clarke, and Escambia County. And we're targeting for 100% of this funding to be spent to benefit low and moderate income households. Eligible applicants for this program, eligibility will be further defined in the action plan and the program guidelines, but in general, eligible applicants must have owned the home at the time of the storm. The home must have unrepaired storm damage. The home must be in one of the impacted counties. And if you're an owner-occupied unit, you must have occupied the home as a primary residence. This is not intended to fix up vacation homes. Single-family primary residences only. That program will be administered by ADECA with support from a couple of key vendors. Key vendors being the program management vendor and the general contractor. So the program management vendor will be responsible for all of those day-to-day operations of the program. So intake, eligibility, duplication of benefits, environmental review, construction management, citizen complaints, etc. And the general contractors, of course, will be responsible for the actual building of the houses, the actual repairs, swinging hammers, etc. Estimated schedule for this program, we anticipate this program will launch sometime in late quarter one of 2023. The first thing that needs to happen before we launch any of these programs is we need to get HUD approval of the action plan, which we expect will happen in January of next year, launching this program sometime in March. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean to talk a little bit about the locally administered programs, those programs that will be administered by our local government partners.
Thank you, Jenna. And just to reiterate, the state implemented program is certainly going to benefit all of the most impacted and impacted counties from these two storms. But going into the more locally driven programs, there's several different avenues to pursue. The first is really the local recovery planning program. This program is really intended to provide an opportunity for localities to drill down in more detail on a more localized level and discover more of the opportunities for recovery that exist in their communities. There's also a housing competition and direct allocation programs to administer eligible housing activities, as well as direct infrastructure, economic development, and both from a direct allocation and also a competitive model for the most impacted communities and the non-mids as well. So to drill down a little bit more into the local recovery planning program, again, it's intended to provide funding to the counties to really assess on a more localized level the impacts to those communities and what projects and or programs would be beneficial to those communities to recover from these two storms. It's really intended to not only assess but also collaborate with the local towns and cities within those communities to really have a comprehensive approach to identifying these projects. These projects will be intended to recover for the immediate aftereffects of the storm, but also identify projects for future mitigation as well. The state will also take this opportunity to assess the local capacity of our partners in the communities to manage these funds compliantly as well. There's a lot of requirements that come down from HUD in terms of financial controls, policies and procedures, duplication of benefits. The list goes on. So that is an opportunity for the state to really ensure that we're setting up our partners for long-term success and avoiding any sort of recapture or repayment of funds in the future. So some of the intended outcomes from this program really are to, one, most importantly, again, document a more localized unmet need for the recovery. Two, engage community stakeholders. Three, really sort of get the prerequisites for the competitive programs completed up front with the state's assistance through these planning funds. Because part of the application for the competitive programs, whether it's housing or eco-dev or infrastructure, will be to have done some of this planning work. So this program is really going to help support localities to get ahead of the curve, identify those projects, get a lot of prerequisites out of the way so that they're ready to go when funding becomes available. So going into a little bit more detail on the housing side of the programs right now. So starting off with first the direct allocations. So this is the allocation based off of a formula, budget of $50 million going to the City of Mobile, the County of Mobile, and also Baldwin County. Since these are already mid-counties, mid-areas, 100% of these funds will be dedicated and spent in these areas. And again, with a target of 70% LMI benefit. So these programs, directly administered by these jurisdictions, can do all and any eligible housing activities except for those that relate to single-family recovery, because that will be covered by the state implemented program. But that means that these localities can do anything else that's eligible. And there's a laundry list of eligible housing activities that are available. I'm not going to go into every single one, but some examples are here on this screen. Rehab, recon, new construction of multifamily affordable housing, home buyer buyout, home buyer assistance for LMI persons, relocation assistance, demolition or clearance of hazardous structures, elevations. Again, this is just a quick sampling, but really it is intended that these localities, through their assessment and the planning process, will identify projects and or programs and then propose eligible activities to meet those unmet needs. Similar to the state implemented program, the timeline is roughly the same. Anticipation of the action plan approval in late January 2023, executing subrecipient agreements with the subrecipients shortly thereafter, and then target for projects to begin in late July, early August 2023. But again, this is all contingent upon once HUD approves the action plan. In terms of the competitive housing programs, this is a pot of money available to all of the remaining storm-impacted counties, excluding Mobile, Baldwin, and the City of Mobile. It's a $30 million budget, targeting at least 50% of those funds to be spent in the remaining two mid-counties of Clarke and Escambia. And then the other funds, 50%, can also then be spent in the other storm-impacted counties as well. 50% target for LMI benefit. Similar to the direct allocation to the counties of Baldwin and Mobile and the city, same eligible housing activities apply here, with the exception of any single-family related housing activity, because again, that is going to be covered through the state-run single-family recovery program. Similar activities exist here for the competitive program as did for the direct allocation. But again, whatever the needs are in the community, if they're eligible housing activities, they can be done. But for the competitive program, there will be applications that will need to be submitted based off of the housing recovery plan, and those will be scored based off of some sample criteria above. That is still under development, but typical criteria that has been used in other disaster recovery programs consists of the project feasibility or the program feasibility, readiness to proceed, cost reasonableness. This is an important factor. This is a HUD requirement to ensure that the taxpayer funds are being spent in a reasonable manner. Assess the resilience and mitigative aspects of a project, impacts and benefits to vulnerable populations as well. So these are just samples. Again, the actual requirements are still under development, but these projects will be scored on the same rubric. Similar timeline, once action plan is approved in January 2023, we do intend to execute subrecipient agreements with selected projects and or programs towards the end of August 2023, and then that's when projects will commence. Since there is an identified interest and need for infrastructure projects, as well as economic development recovery programs, the state has also set aside direct allocations to the three mid areas, Baldwin County, Mobile, and also the City of Mobile, with $68.8 million in a direct allocation. 100% of the funds All these funds will be spent in mid-counties, benefiting at least 50% LMI populations. This program will allow for a wide range of eligible infrastructure programs and projects, all with the intention to protect property and life and also then mitigate future impacts to storms. There's a laundry list of eligible activities here as well that these subrecipients can engage in. Acquisition of private property for flood control or mitigation, demolition of any storm damaged buildings, provision of public services such as homeless shelters, construction of public facilities, workforce training, small business incubators. There's a lot of funding eligible activities under these programs. So again, what is identified in the local recovery plans will help inform some of the eligible activities that can get funded through this direct allocation. Again, we do anticipate subrecipients agreements being executed shortly after the approval of the action plan, and projects beginning in late to early 2023, July and August. In terms of the competitive program, exactly the same as the direct allocations. It's a $22 million budget. To at least 10% of those funds have to be spent in mid areas, and then again with a 50% LMI target benefit as well. So any county excluding Baldwin and Mobile can participate in the competition. Again, after the planning process, they will have identified some of the unmet needs in their communities and use that plan as part of their application to go after the funds. And then these projects will then again be evaluated on consistent and similar criteria. And again, that's still under development. Similar eligible activities as the direct allocation as well. Natural green infrastructure, communication infrastructure, for example, facade improvements. But it kind of depends on what comes out of the planning process and what the localities have identified as remaining unmet need. Again, similar scoring criteria, similar timeline. Once the action plan is approved in January, we intend to execute the subrecipient agreements and begin projects in late August 2023. So for more detail on some of these eligible activities, you can go to HUD's website and see what is eligible under the Housing and Community Development Act at HUD.gov. So those are the programs, the budget allocations, the targets for the mid-spending and the LMI benefit. But before we sort of conclude our presentation, we just also want to stress too, there's other requirements and other considerations with these funds as well. And for every disaster recovery allocation, HUD's Office of the Inspector General gets a separate allocation as well. And that allocation is intended to fund the office to investigate and conduct audits on all grantees and their programs and projects to make sure they're in compliance with not only the program guidelines that the grantee has created, but to ensure compliance with any federal rules and regulations as well. They review funding expenditures to make sure that they're meeting program and federal requirements. They do performance reviews to assess whether that the grantee and its subrecipients are spending money in a timely and responsible fashion. And lastly, they investigate cases of fraud, duplicative payments, corruption, and any other irregularities. Again, their sole intention is to kick the tires on any program and project that is funded through DR, and when your sole purpose is to find any irregularities, they will find some. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So that's why there's so many tight controls, so many rules and regulations that go into the action plan to ensure the responsible spending and administration of this money. Common fraud schemes consist of embezzlement, theft, bribery, kickbacks, a lot of identity theft as well, a lot of forging of documents. These are things that there are controls going to be put in place from the state through subrecipients as well to ensure that documents are valid and reviewed. What can happen if fraud is committed? Criminal, civil charges, probation, imprisonment, fines, repayment of grant funds, or all of the above. And there are several case studies that have happened in recent times where fraud has been committed, caught, and individuals had to repay those funds in addition to fines, and in some cases, imprisonment as well. So this is something that HUD takes very seriously, as do we. So if there are any suspicions of fraud, the OIG has its own dedicated hotline. That's right here. Their website as well. That any concerns can be reported as well. So action plan timeline and next steps. So as you can see, we're nearly 2 years from the anniversary of these two storms. Congress then allocated the money roughly a year later and issued those 2 Federal Register notices that Jenna mentioned. Held our first listening session back in early August, and this week we're wrapping up 2 public hearings. We're going to publish the action plan on the 20th, hold 1 more public hearing to hear from the public one more time, and then on October 20th, that public comment period is going to end. So definitely please get your comments in today online so that we can review them and account for them in the action plan. And then by no later November 20th, the state intends to submit its action plan to HUD for review and approval. And we do anticipate HUD approval by late January 2023. Thank you very much.